Two 35-150s, one from Samyang and one from Tamron. They actually share a lot in common, but there is a $500 price difference. So what is actually different between these two lenses, and which one should you get? This video is sponsored by PPA. Join a community of over 35,000 photographers, find equipment insurance, education, and business tools made specifically for small business owners like you. Price-wise, the Tamron is $18.99 and the Samyang is $13.99. You get a 6-year warranty with the Tamron if you register it, and a 1-year warranty with the Samyang. In terms of size, the Samyang is 93mm by 157mm, and the Tamron is 89mm by 158mm, so they're very similar in size. With that said, the Samyang is actually about a millimeter shorter when the barrel is extended. Both have 82mm filter threads on the front. The Samyang actually weighs a little bit more at 2.9 pounds compared to the Tamron at 2.6. They're both very heavy pieces of glass though. Minimum focus distance on both is identical, 16 inches or 33 centimeters. And in terms of the physical lens design, both have 21 elements. The Samyang is in 18 groups and the Tamron is in 15 groups. Both also have 9 aperture blades within them. So technically speaking, on paper, they're both incredibly similar lenses. There used to be an argument for not getting third-party glass compared to Sony glass. Autofocus was hit or miss, and sticking with native glass just was the smarter, safer option, albeit the more expensive one. But now it's pretty tough between a third-party lens and a Sony lens, apart from a few areas. With Sony glass, you're always going to get better focus breathing, especially with the newer bodies, because it has focus breathing compensation. So those two things paired together, third-party glass is never going to be able to really touch that. So it's important to see what the focus breathing looks like with both of these. Starting with the Samyang here at 35mm. Look at the edges. And we'll zoom in to 150 with the Samyang. A bit further back. This is 150 with the Samyang. And now we're using the Tamron. 35mm to start with. Same focus settings on the FX3. Look at the corners. That's where we're going to see any potential breathing, if there is any. And now zoomed in to 150. Let's put them on the screen right here and we'll see if you can tell any difference between the two. Now, another area third party isn't going to be quite as good as Sony glass is with the stabilization, and what I mean by that is the active stabilization. I've done a whole video covering this subject, which I'll pop up here for you, which really shows you the major differences, but these will not perform as well as Sony glass. So let's test the stabilization both at 30mm and then at 150. So handheld, just kind of the same way I'd normally do it. Elbows into my chest. Let's focus on Woody there. This is 150 with active stabilization turned on the Tamron 35-150 at f2.8. Same thing now with the Samyang. Focus on the same thing. I imagine it to perform pretty much identically. Yeah, it looks pretty similar. Again, FX3 35-150, this time with the Samyang instead. Let's put the video side by side and see how it looks. See if you can see any difference between the two. This video is sponsored by PPA, the Professional Photographers of America. My favorite thing about being a member with them is you're a business owner, you very much rely on your camera to make your business work for you. Just being a member with PPA immediately gets you up to $15,000 of gear insurance. Now, in terms of how that works, if something does happen to your gear and you opt to have a full replacement value, $350 flat fee deductible, or if you prefer to get it repaired, that's a $50 flat fee deductible. Just having either of those as an option for you immediately pays for the membership. I also think it's the most valuable because without your camera gear, you don't have a business. PPA also has something called the Indemnification Trust. It helps you with data loss, should anything ever happen, negligence, and malpractice protection for your business as well. If you're not sure what that means, it's basically help for you and your small business if you ever have an unhappy client and you need help with legal fees. There's also a massive education platform on there with over 900 videos that can just help you learn about how to run your business a bit more effectively, how to do things like astrophotography if you want to learn specifically more photo styles. If you want to be a member with PPA and get that full replacement value equipment insurance, the data loss, and the indemnification trust, cost and all the education. There's a bunch more things as well. $27.92 a month. If you click on the link down below, you'll also get a special discount on your membership. Thank you PPA for sponsoring today's video. Let's get back to the video. So let's talk autofocus on these lenses, specifically for video. Now, I've used the Tamron for multiple weddings this year on the A7R5, on the FX6, on the FX3. I've had zero issues. It performs flawlessly. Zero issues with it tracking when I tap on things, zero issues with hunting. It's fantastic when it comes to the autofocus. The nice thing with the Tamron as well is that it does have that USB-C port, which means they can update the firmware for things like autofocus as and when they need to in the future. Now, the Samyang actually had a massive autofocus upgrade itself recently. This doesn't have a USB-C port on it, but you can buy a dock. It's about 40 bucks. It just connects on the bottom there, and that has USB-C. That goes onto your computer, and then you can update the firmware for this. There were complaints and issues that this didn't have the best autofocus performance. I haven't had that experience. Mine came with the update applied, and it has been flawless again. I've shot 2 weddings with this, and I'm going to overlay footage so you can see here a couple of examples where it's a bit more challenging for it. No issues with me tapping on things and it tracking things, even with objects going in front of it. It picks it up after that object's gone by. No issues with eye autofocus. I can't complain about either of these when it comes to the autofocus performance. It performed exactly as I'd want them to. If I had issues with either of these, I would let you know, because it's important to know when you're paying this much. I can't complain. Parfocal. Now, this is the big thing for if you shoot video. What parfocal means is if you focus, let's say at 35mm, and then you zoom in, is it still in focus? Now, the Samyang actually on paper is parfocal, but the Tamron isn't. So let's just have a little comparison and see how each of these performs in a parfocal test. So manually focused at 35mm on this little white balance reference sheet right here, and then we'll zoom in without changing the focus and see if it's still in focus. So we're gonna actually put focus peaking on as well, just to confirm. All right, so we're manually focused at 35mm on the Samyang here. This is technically a parfocal lens on paper. Now let's zoom in to 150. We're at f2.8. So now we've changed out to the Tamron, which isn't parfocal. Manually focus. And we'll zoom in. Yeah, that's definitely not parfocal in any way. It's completely off. So aside from what we've already discussed in terms of lens design and features, there actually are a few differences here between these two lenses, and they're quite interesting. Both lenses have zoom rings. The Tamron's is about 2/3 the size of the Samyang's, but the Tamron's one is a little bit more grippy. You can probably see it from the overhead view there. But because the Samyang's is larger, it makes it a little bit easier to find when you're doing it blindly. So this is really a personal preference. Do you prefer it to be a bit more grippy, or do you prefer it to just be a little bit bigger? That's up to you. Now, I will say that the Tamron's is a lot firmer to turn and then subsequently zoom in compared to the Samyang's, which is not loose, but it feels looser compared to the Tamron. Now, I've been using both of these on gimbals this year at weddings, so I want to be able to zoom in and out as and when. And I do find that the Samyang is a little bit easier to fly on a gimbal and then zoom in and out because it's not quite as stiff as the Tamron's. Neither are bad. Again, it's going to be personal preference. I just found this a bit easier to use when I'm on a gimbal because it's slightly looser. Now, they both have focus rings, and it's kind of the reverse of the zoom ring. The Samyang's is about 2/3 the size of the Tamron's, but the Samyang's is more grippy than the Tamron's. So it really depends on whether you find it easier to have a bigger, less grippy one, or a smaller, more grippy one. Personal preference. It's also important to mention that with the zoom rings, neither compress on themselves when you put them flat on a table like that, which is a good thing. They both have lock buttons on them as well, so you can lock them at 35mm there if you wanted to. So if they do become loose over time, which does happen, then you have that lock button on there as well. It's also a good test that you want to see when I lift both these lenses up if the barrel drops out a little bit. And you see it does on the Samyang, just ever so slightly, and that's where the importance of having the lock on there comes into play, because if I drop it down, it doesn't obviously come out of the barrel whatsoever. Material-wise, they both feel very similar in terms of design. If we have to really nitpick here, I'd say the Tamron has a slight edge in terms of like this little tiny texture, but we're really nitpicking. This just, yeah, it has a little bit more texture than the Samyang here, but neither are badly designed. Neither feel cheap. They both feel like high quality premium lenses. I do actually quite like the little orange ring on the, let me just unlock that there. The little orange ring, which you'll see on the top down there on the Samyang. It kind of reminds me of the Canon L series lenses while being like this own unique color to itself. I would prefer this little silver ring here to be removed. There's something about the silver that just screams not cheap, but like not premium to me. If that was black instead, I think it would be a much nicer design. So maybe in the future they can remove that, but again, that's just personal preference. On the rear elements there, both have rubber rear gaskets for weather sealing. Neither of these lenses have aperture rings on them, but hold that thought. Both have a plethora of buttons and switches on them, and you can completely customize these, and that's where things get a little bit interesting with these two. On the Samyang, you have a custom 1, 2, and 3 button there, and then actual buttons on the lenses, which you can do things like focus hold, change between autofocus, manual focus. You can assign it to whatever you want. The Samyang has 2, whereas the Tamron actually has 1, 2, 3. So a little edge with the Tamron there. In custom button 1, the autofocus manual focus switch just works as autofocus manual focus. In custom button 2, if you switch to that, it changes the focus ring to be a D-clicked aperture ring when you're in the autofocus mode. If you change it to the manual focus mode, you get a linear focus ring, which is really nice for video. In custom button 3, autofocus just works as autofocus, but then when you switch to manual focus, you get this control that allows you to do dolly zoom style shots, which is quite interesting. That's something the Tamron can't do, but it's more of a niche feature, but it's nice that it has it. And then on top of that, the actual buttons have this uniqueness to them as well. When you're in the manual focus mode, you can set a focus point, and you can click and hold one of these buttons for 3 seconds, and it will remember that focus point. You can do that on both of the buttons. So then if you're focusing on something else, but you want to go back to the memorized focus point, you can tap that and it will go back to it. So that's pretty interesting that it has that on there, and that can be useful specifically for filmmaking, for making videos. That's what you can do with the Samyang, and then the Tamron has its own uniqueness as well. Tamron has its lens utility app, which you connect via USB-C to your computer, and then you can assign everything on this how you want it to perform. You can literally change everything on your custom switches, how the focus performs, if you want it to be a bit more linear, a bit more responsive. You can also set it so that it can do A and B focus pull points. You can set maximum focus distances, and you can also change it so that the focus ring does perform like the aperture ring as well. And you can customize all that stuff in the lens utility app. So yes, they both do have aperture rings on them technically if you're using the custom modes. So they share a lot in common, but they do have their own uniqueness to them as well. Which one should you buy? Well, that was the whole point of this video. Hopefully by this point you're like, oh, I like the Samyang more, or I like the Tamron more, but it's entirely up to you. I would say the Samyang maybe has a little bit more functionality when it comes to being a lens for video, for filmmaking, just because it has that parfocal aspect to it. That is really useful for shooting video if you need to change focal lengths really quickly and still be in focus. Even if you're using autofocus, it's still fast, but like it's nice to have that parfocal ability. So yeah, very similar, but also different in their own way. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Take care. Thanks again to PPA for sponsoring this video. Don't forget to click on the link down below and get $25 off your PPA membership.